senators who come from non-border states. And so Senator Cruz and I figured it'd be a great opportunity for us to host a number of senators. I think the number is somewhere up to 18, maybe as high as 20, that'll be traveling to McAllen. And tonight we will attend a muster of the Border Patrol, and then we'll go out on to ride along with them to see some of the conditions along the river that they have to deal with on a nightly basis. Then tomorrow we'll meet with some local stakeholders, local community leaders who have had to bear the brunt of this flow of humanity. We'll go to the Donna holding facility that you've seen and heard a lot about, so people can see the conditions under which the migrants are held. And then we'll finally take a ride on the river, so people can get sort of a sense of what the Border Patrol has to deal with on a regular basis. And my hope is that they'll have a chance to see the Border Patrol stations where, because of the Border Patrol is currently overwhelmed, migrants are living really side by side, children untested for COVID-19 in these holding facilities much longer than the 72 hours which the law allows them to hold them before they are then transferred to Health and Human Services. But this is a product, I believe, of two things. One is that the Biden administration simply eliminated the previous administration rules that were in place and had no plans to replace them, and the impression that anybody who wants to come to the United States can do so at will. Obviously, there's a strong desire for people to improve their lot in life. We all understand that. But America is the most generous country in the world when it comes to legal immigration. We naturalize about 1 million people a year. But here, the cartels and human smugglers recognize that this is a money-making proposition for them. And as the Border Patrol is overwhelmed with children and the need to deal with children in a humane fashion, they're taken off the front lines, and the narcotics smuggling takes advantage of those gaps in coverage. So this is part of a conscious strategy by the smugglers, by the criminal organizations that profit from this business. And the American people, and particularly Texas, are paying the price. What we need is a plan. I'm happy to work with the administration. Congressman Cuellar and I, for example, had a bill called the Humane Act to streamline the asylum process, which is, I think, one of the biggest problems that we see reflected with the catch and release policies, which give the impression that anybody who wants to come to the United States can successfully do so. And I'm also working with my colleague, Senator Sinema from Arizona, on a new version of this. So we'd like to find a bipartisan solution to help the Biden administration get out of this hole that they've dug for themselves, because it's in the best interest of Texas, it's in the best interest of the country. So with that, let me stop and answer a few questions.
Thank you, Senator. First, we will go to Eli with KVEO. Eli, go ahead and ask your question. Eli, are you with us? All right, next we will go ahead to Isamar with Telemundo 40. Isamar, go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, good afternoon. Good morning, Senator Cornyn.
Morning.
How are you? Hope you guys are doing well. My first question is, with the influx of migrants we keep seeing every day, right now we currently have a reporter doing about 300 migrants in La Jolla. There's been talks with Congressman Cuellar, who you work with closely, about what about these people that actually have visas that are trying to, they keep extending the non-essential travel to
Right.
to the United States. Is there any plans to,
Head southeast on East
keep
Jefferson
extending
Street.
it? Oh, sorry. Is there any plans to keep extending it, or is there any other plans that the federal government may be opening these for actual people with visas?
Well, that's the supreme irony and disconnect here, because under Title 42, which, as you point out, is a public health directive, it limits cross-border travel in the interest of mitigating the virus to essential travel. Meanwhile, our border communities are being harmed because, of course, the legitimate trade and travel is much diminished, and so it's hurting our local border communities. That's one of the ways in which they're paying the price for the mitigation efforts for the virus. But it seems like the virus is optional, at least the mitigation efforts in the part of the administration, because they're picking and choosing who is subject to Title 42. And many migrants are not being tested. Of course, the Border Patrol doesn't detain everybody who comes across, so there are many who are no doubt are coming across untested. And then there are instances of testing where somebody's tested positive, but because there's no place to put them, they're given a bus ticket and they go to the interior of the country and are told to quarantine in place there. So that's another reason why I want my colleagues from other parts of the country to come to the Valley and to see the border and to talk to the leaders there and the business people, and so they can get a more complete picture about what the consequences are of this approach, or lack of any plan.
And just one more question: will you guys also be allowed for tomorrow's trip to be able to, take your own images of your tours or everything? Maybe, I don't know. I know they don't let media, but I don't know if they're letting yourself as federal authorities to do this.
Well, I'm sure they will try to limit a look into these detention facilities. Fortunately, I think we've gotten a peek through some of the pictures that were published by Axios, and it's not a pretty picture. But I do think it's a mistake by the administration to keep the press from these facilities so the American people can judge for themselves whether this is a crisis or a challenge, as the Biden administration has said. But to my knowledge, we will not be able to take pictures, and I think the press is going to be limited. But we're going to try to be as transparent as we possibly can and get you as much information as we can, because I think the American people have a right to know what's happening.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Next, we will go to Violetta with News West 9. Go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for being here with us and letting us ask some questions. I have a couple of things out of Midland. So we had this migrant facility open up about 2 weeks ago, and now we have one in Pecos opening up in 1 week from now. Information here has been so hard to come by. We've filed some Freedom of Information requests, and now we're just on hold for 45 days. We have been told no more children are being brought to Midland, but last night we spoke with Congressman Pfluger, and he told us they were planning to bring another busload overnight. How much information do you have? What have you been able to access? Because really all that we can do right now is sit and wait on these on the paperwork and sit out of that facility and watch what happens.
Yes, it's been very frustrating. I know the leaders there in Midland, including Congressman Pfluger, were not notified of the federal government's intention to establish a detention facility at that man camp in Midland. That's been pretty much the pattern. So a lack of transparency, lack of communication, certainly lack of collaboration in trying to facilitate these facilities for the minor children that are overwhelming the system. I just posted on my Twitter feed, it's John Cornyn, a list of the latest numbers that we've gotten from Health and Human Services on the various detention facilities and how many people are at each one. But the Border Patrol has told me you cannot build enough capacity to get ahead of the flood of people that are going to come in. So this is a I think if the administration thinks that they have this under control, they're sadly mistaken, and it's going to get nothing but worse.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I had one follow-up question to this, if I could ask really quick. We have been in contact with the offices of refugee resettlement, and they tell us, you know, at least in our area, they've never really dealt with this amount of children. One of the steps that they're looking at, and I think they just don't have any information either, is if they turn 17, they have to be processed by customs. But if they don't, they're trying to figure out how many of these kids are going to be actually getting that refugee state and stay around. Do you have any information on that?
My understanding is all children will be processed by the Border Patrol, handed over to Health and Human Services until they are then placed with a sponsor in the United States. That could be a relative. It could be somebody that's basically like acting like a foster family. But I do worry that there's not adequate follow-up for the children placed with non-family sponsors. And I've heard stories of people making calls to the telephone number, and no answer, knocking on the front doors to try to see if the children are okay, and there's no response. And we simply don't know to what extent these children are maybe recruited into gangs or subject to trafficking or the like. This is, again, another reason why we need to change our asylum processing laws to give these children a chance to present their case at the border without being released into the United States to an unknown future. That's what Congressman Cuellar and I have proposed, and that would be, I think, the most immediate way to try to stem the tide.
All right, next we will go to Crystal with KRGV. Crystal, go ahead and ask your question.
All right, can everyone hear me? Sorry for having a little trouble on my end. Right, well, thank you, Senator. I have a brief question. I know that a lot of times immigration reform can be a sensitive subject, but my question for you is, what would you personally like to see in regards to this reform, in regards to how not only children are being processed, but how even people are seeking asylum, and possibly even, you know, those who are looking to become U.S. citizens. However, that process, I've been told, is fairly lengthy. What's your view, and what would you like to see happen for this future?
Well, I think legal immigration has been one of the comparative advantages that the United States has had compared to the rest of the world. We are the most generous country in the world when it comes to legal immigration, naturalizing about 1 million people a year. But of course, the people we're talking about now are folks trying to jump ahead of the line of people who are waiting patiently through the legal process. And we've talked a little bit about the dynamics of that, both the profit motive for the smugglers and the drug traffickers who take advantage of flooding the zone and distracting or diverting the Border Patrol so they can't stop the drugs. And this is a very conscious strategy. But to answer your question, I think this crisis has made it harder for those of us who would actually like to do immigration reform to do so, because people are upset, as they should be, at the lack of a plan to deal with this surge of humanity. And it's going to take all of us. I'm willing to be a partner in that effort on a bipartisan basis. But until we get this current crisis under control, I don't see an avenue for doing other immigration reform. I've said previously that I would like to provide a permanent legal solution for DACA recipients. I think they've been used as a political football for too long, and they came as children, have done nothing wrong. We don't hold children responsible for what their adults, their parents have done. And so those are two areas, asylum reform and perhaps a permanent solution for DACA, which I think may work. But the truth is we're going to have to stop this surge of humanity first, and to show the American people that they can trust us, they can trust the federal government to be able to deal with this surge of illegal immigration.
All right. Thank you, Senator.
Next, we will go to Robert Arnold with KPRC. Robert, go ahead and ask your question.
Great. Thank you very much. Good morning, Senator.
Good morning.
The things that have been said by the people who've experienced the ebb and flow of the migrants coming across since 2014, they say that it doesn't really matter who is in the White House or what administration is in the White House. It's that the root causes of why the people are fleeing from specifically Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador to the United States have never been fully addressed. Do you have any plans to try and address those root causes in those countries?
I think what you're referring to is what sometimes people call the push factors. And we all understand that people will want to leave. Well, let me start over again. I don't think most people want to leave their home, but they do if they see opportunities economically, or if they're fleeing violence. I can understand that. We all can, just as human beings, understand why people would be motivated. And you add that to the financial arrangements with the smugglers, and you can see why there's such a strong push factor. The Border Patrol also talks about the pull factors, and that is the perception that illegal immigration will have no consequences. And to me, that's the most important thing that we are neglecting. I think that the administration is simply neglected. There were consequences associated with illegal immigration under the previous administration, but when those policies were reversed, it looked like it was an open door policy. So that's what I think we need to address. As far as what's happening in Central America, it's sad, but we have no record of nation building. We tried to do it in Afghanistan, we tried to do it in Iraq, but we do need to try to support responsible people in those countries to try to help them, and we do that. The American taxpayer is very generous, but I think it's more complicated than just the conditions in those countries, because as the Border Patrol told us, the Del Rio sector, when Congressman Cuellar and I were there recently, just so far this year, they've detained people from 54 different countries. So this is not just a phenomenon of what's happening in Central America or Mexico.
All right, next we will go to Eli with KVEO. Eli, go ahead and ask your question.
Natalie, I hope you're keeping an eye on the votes, because I'm not.
Senator, I think you have a few more minutes. I think Eli
Okay.
might be having some technical issues, but he wanted to ask if you could expand on the bill you're working on with Congressman Cuellar.
Well, essentially, what we're trying to do is to make sure that the children who claim asylum get processed at the border. We move them to the head of the line so that if they have a legitimate claim for asylum, that they can be heard. We know that statistically about 12% of the cases that are presented to immigration judges are sustained or upheld, and people are allowed to stay legally in the United States having qualified for asylum. But we also know that the smugglers coach the migrants to tell them, here are the magic words that will get you released into the United States and given a notice to appear for a court hearing at a future date. The problem with that is the smugglers know that we have a backlog of about 1.2 million immigration cases in the courts, and we'll never clear that backlog. So I think what we need to do is to move the judges to the border, and we need to move the children in particular to the head of the line so they can have their court hearing while they're being detained there to see who can legitimately stay and who can't. That would deal with one of the pull factors that I mentioned earlier, which is right now the perception that you can make it to the interior of the United States without any consequences.
All right, Senator, let's go next to Sean with KSAT. Sean, go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you, Natalie. Senator, good morning. I know you're getting close to having to go to a vote, but my question for you is, yesterday the Biden administration announced that the vice president would take on the leading role in addressing this and working with Central American leaders to kind of stem the flow. What do you think of that decision, and what kind of success, if any, do you think she'll have with these Central American leaders in trying to address that situation that we're seeing here on our border?
Well, I think that I'm glad that President Biden designated the vice president. That demonstrates that they now believe this is an important issue and needs to be addressed. But just what the vice president needs to do is come talk to her former colleagues in Congress and to work together on a bipartisan basis to fix the holes in our law, which allow the smugglers to exploit those flaws, those holes in our law. And as I mentioned earlier, while I believe we need to try to support other countries to help stem the violence and lawlessness, the gang activity, the drug smuggling, we don't have a good record at nation building. So I don't think we're ever going to build the Central American countries into a place like the United States. But I wish them well, and we certainly want to support them where we can. But this is not just either, as I pointed out earlier, not limited to Central America or Mexico. When the Del Rio Border Patrol chief tells us they detained people from 54 countries just in the first part of this year, what that tells me is this is an international human smuggling operation by these criminal organizations that get rich by the head. And they charge you a certain amount to come from Mexico, a premium to come from Central America. But if you want to come from a Middle Eastern country or Europe, then you pay even more. So they view the migrants as a commodity that makes them rich. And so this is more complex than I think just trying to help our neighbors in Central America.
All right, thank you, everyone. Unfortunately, the senator does have to go vote. So that will be the conclusion of our TV availability. But if we weren't able to get to your question today, feel free to email Libby or I, and we are happy to help. We hope to see some of you tomorrow, and thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Hey there, everybody. Will Dupree in the KXAN live studio once again. We just heard from Senator John Cornyn doing a media availability, talking to reporters, answering some questions about the upcoming trip that is scheduled tomorrow with him and Senator Cruz and several other Republican senators. They're going to be taking a trip to the U.S. Mexico border to what they say is to, quote, assess the escalating migrant crisis. Senator Cornyn just mentioning a moment ago that he's working on legislation with Representative Cuellar to address the asylum process for these young children that are coming to the border. The legislation, he says, would move them to the front of the line so that they could have their asylum claims heard first by an immigration judge. So again, we will be continuing our reporting as that contingent, the Republican contingent, goes to the border tomorrow, and you can follow us for the latest updates on that particular trip. You can do that on KXAN.com and the KXAN News mobile app. Download it if you've not done so, please. Thank you all for watching again. I'm Will Dupree in the KXAN live studio. Please be safe, stay healthy, and take care. We'll see you back here another time with other updates. Talk to you later.